Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Philadelphia Asian American Film Festival live stream. My name is Jackie. I'm one of the social media managers for Philadelphia Asian American Film Festival, and I'm coming at you live from closing night at Asian Arts Initiative. I'll be moderating today's filmmaker Q&A for the feature film White Elephant, which you still have time to rent. We're here with director Andrew Chung and lead actress Zareen Busha, and I'll be taking questions. So make sure to type your audience questions in the comments section so that we can see them and get back to you. All right. So Andrew and Zareen, you want to introduce yourselves to our viewing audience?
Sure, I'll start, I guess. My name is Andrew. I'm the writer-director of White Elephant. I'm based in Toronto. I've been writing and directing for about 10 years. I also used to work in distribution and development for a few years, but yeah, I just make films today.
I'm Zareen Bushra. I play Pooja in White Elephant. I'm also based in Toronto. Other than acting, I would also say that I'm sort of pursuing directing a little bit, and I work in the festival circuit as well with Real World Film Festival, and in the production side with Faye Pictures.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for stopping by. It is such a treat. Some of us were talking about your film, and we are so excited to be able to offer that as part of the festival. Surely do manage to pack a lot into a roughly 1 hour film. So I'm going to start by going all the way back, ancient history. Andrew, your parents' lives. I read that your parents were born and raised in Calcutta and then moved to Canada. So did their experiences in any way inspire this film? Or maybe is there something of you in Pooja?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I wouldn't say they inspired the film. It doesn't really have any relation to the experiences they've had. But I think just the fact that I grew up in a household where Indian culture was pretty strong. It was kind of a hybrid Chinese-Indian household. So a lot of, I would say, culinary traditions are similar to Indian culture. And they also have an Indian accent because my dad can speak Hindi. So parts of that are I guess naturally part of me. Although I've never been to India, and I've never I wasn't born there. I feel like it still kind of seeped into my self a little bit. So I think in that respect, it might have influenced the film in my attraction to tackling characters that are from the South Asian community. But what sparked it really was we were part of an exhibition happening locally at an art gallery, and we were tasked to tell a story about a culture that was not necessarily our own. So I chose the South Asian community because it was very close to me personally. So I thought I could kind of tell a story authentically. I also grew up in a neighborhood that was highly populated by South Asian kids, so I was around the culture quite a bit. So I felt like I could do it accurately and authentically, and I did a lot of research as well to ensure that I could represent the characters as best I can. But to answer your other question, yes, Pooja also, a lot of her character is part of the experiences I had in high school, for sure.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing that with us. Zareen, what attracted you to this project? There's so many exciting aspects of it. So just if you can share with the viewing audience, I'm sure they'd love to know.
Yeah, for sure. So fun fact, this was actually like one of the first things I auditioned for after I got like my first agent. So that was probably the biggest thing for me was getting to audition for a lead role in a film, which was the most exciting part. And a funny thing about this was I was actually very sick when they were holding auditions. So I couldn't make the in-person audition, and I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, I actually can't go to this. And then they actually got back to my agent and asked if I wanted to send a self-tape. So I spent so much time on that self-tape because I was like, I didn't make the audition, they're probably already so annoyed at me, so I have to make this good. But at the same time, I was like, oh, you know, in-person auditions always have that leg up, so I'm probably not going to get this. But then I got the call back and then I got cast in it, which was insane. In terms of what actually drew me to the story was, again, the fact that it was about a South Asian character, which even when I had started auditioning wasn't really happening. And this was only like 3 years ago. I think in terms of stories about South Asian people, it's taken off, I would say, in the past like year and a half, or like maybe even during the pandemic or so. But I had really not come across anything where the character was so specifically South Asian. It was always like, here's an open ethnicity, or like, you know, something like that. So I'd never read anything or auditioned for anything at that point that was about a South Asian character. So that was definitely one of the more exciting things for me.
Let's keep going in that direction. So Pooja has this dilemma, right? She's growing up in, and she's consuming culture that's made by and for a white majority. And I'm sure that resonated with a lot of viewers. I'm watching the movie and I'm thinking about all the bad decisions I made as a child, right? So Zareen, you were born in Dhaka, Bangladesh.
Yes.
Yes, but did you relate to this aspect of Pooja's experience? Like, what did you sort of bring from your own experiences to bring that character to life?
Yeah, absolutely. I was born in Dhaka, but I moved here by the time I was 8. And even when I was in Bangladesh, I still like one part of Pooja's personality that completely was the exact same as mine. Was like her whole personality was just the fact that she watched movies, which was literally just me in high school. That was my entire personality. I just couldn't shut up about it. But it was very similar, probably not to the extent of Pooja's experience, but it was very similar to the sense of that there was a part of you that longs to sort of not be what you are, because of all the things that you're consuming. And, you know, that's it. Loving movies, you want to be in movies and you want to be the person on screen, and you're not necessarily what is on screen. So you kind of think that you have to be something else so that you can sort of achieve that dream, right? So I think in terms of that experience, it was very similar. I think Pooja definitely went above and beyond, but I think in terms of the core tenet of what she was feeling, absolutely. I think almost everybody goes through it at one point, and we luckily tend to outgrow it by the time we get older. But in the age that Pooja is, like in that early high school sort of field where you're trying to figure out who you are and what it is you want to be, I think most people do experience that.
Andrew, and is that the strong element of you that's in Pooja? Was it the generational conflict? Do you want to maybe elaborate on your connection to the main character a bit?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think like most people of color that are growing up in the Western world, we have those feelings. So I was obsessed with movies and entertainment as in high school as well, and so I lifted a lot of those feelings that I had in Pooja's character. And you know, I had you know, I didn't have a strong sense of self. Like I was like Zareen said, I longed to be what I saw on TV because I thought that is the life that we're led to believe would be a happy life. You know, so I kind of fell into those trappings as a teenager. And you know, looking at it as an adult, it just looks so silly and ridiculous. Like what's wrong with you, right? Kind of thing. But I think we all kind of went through that in some form. So yeah, that's essentially what I was bringing to Pooja's character from my experience.
What about the decision to use Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet as something of a framing device?
I mean, I feel like because, you know, it's just the quintessential romantic story, although it's, you know, a lot darker, you know, if you really know the Shakespearean story, right? But I think I just used it as kind of like just this archetype for romance that people see on TV, like especially in high school when you're reading Shakespeare and you're, you know, watching so much TV, like you have these ideas about what love is. So I think Pooja's character, you know, that Romeo and Juliet kind of represents that concept in her head about like what love is in her head. So the process of her journey over the film is her, you know, kind of discovering that what she's seeing on TV has no correlation with what real life is actually like. So it's that kind of journey.
It's really fantastic because I could be mistaken, but isn't that the film that sort of made Leo blow up? Like that's the one where he transitioned from like kid TV star to like major heartthrob. Zareen, your character really experiences a whirlwind of emotions and experiences in about 60 minutes, including the bit with the Boslam, including acting a bit of Shakespeare. What was it like filming? How did you prepare?
It was so much fun. So it again, like this movie just happened to have little bits that were completely aligned with who I was as a person. So Leo DiCaprio growing up, I was obsessed with. Like I watched every single one of his movies down to like Basketball Diaries and like the most obscure ones. Like I was watching every single one. So obviously Romeo plus Juliet was one of the bigger ones that I really, really loved. So and had always wanted to sort of reenact in that way. And it almost, this movie exactly, like it gave me the opportunity to have the Juliet costume and sort of not delve into it completely in a very real sense of actually playing Juliet, but just enough where that sort of dream state I was able to sort of accomplish a little bit. So it was very fun to prepare for it. Honestly, I think the costume helped a lot. Just sort of being in the wings and just being there with even Jesse was in his knight armor suit. And just the costumes definitely helped a lot for me. The memorization was a bit difficult because again with Shakespeare it's so specific, and it was one of those things where Andrew was very again specific about like you can't ad-lib Shakespeare, so it has to be the same. So we had to do it a few times, but yeah, it was definitely super fun. It was very, very fun. I just kind of had fun with it, honestly, to prepare. I don't think I really delved into it in like a very like actor way. It was just like it was supposed to be a dream sequence that Pooja was dreaming about. It was supposed to be fun, so I kind of just decided to be a bit more fun with it, I think. Yeah.
Would you ever do a whole Shakespeare production, either of you?
Yes, I would.
People are talking about colorblind casting these days, so
maybe a reinterpretation,
yeah,
like a reimagining maybe with people of color.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely would. I've been looking into doing like Shakespeare workshops and stuff just to sort of have a bit more of skill set in that regard, because I just find that when actors have done a lot of Shakespeare, they're so good in everything else. So I'm like, that's the key.
So this film is often categorized as a rom-com, which strikes me as I can sort of see why, but so a couple questions related to that. First off, do you feel this really fits into the genre of the rom-com? And like, let's just assume that it sort of is a rom-com. That's a genre that's typically associated with women viewers, women writers, women directors, women stars. So I'm super curious, Andrew, the choice of a genre of a romance. Could you tell us a little bit about what drew you to that kind of story?
I mean, I think, yeah, the rom-com thing kind of, yeah, I mean, I feel like it was purposely kind of in a misdirection, just because I feel like in Pooja's life, as much as like she had this backdrop of where it was like a low-income neighborhood that had a lot of crime and violence, that it was entertainment and film and movies and TV that helped her live in this kind of fantasy world in her mind, where she could live this happy life, quote unquote happy life, despite the fact that all this violence and crime is happening behind her, and she doesn't live in a well-to-do neighborhood. And I think for those working class people of color, I think without going directly into that dark territory at the beginning, I was misdirecting that she was having this, that it was like a light like story, and when really that's not the experience of a lot of like working class people of color, right? So and I think a lot of the BIPOC stories that we're seeing today, I think especially in the mainstream, I feel like that's what's been missing. So I purposely kind of juxtapose those two things, where it's like, you know, you have the never have I ever type genre, and then suddenly it takes this weird dark turn, because that's actually how a lot of people of color live, and it's not easy every day for those living in those communities, right? It's a dark reality we often have to contend with every day of our lives. But to stay afloat and to stay, you know, happy in our lives, we find ways and methods to have a life that we enjoy, right? So I think Pooja, in some respect, does that with entertainment. Like, she looks to movies and TV because that's what brings her joy, right? Despite the fact that she's experienced all these things in the background in her high school, right? But yeah, that was the thinking behind that.
That's a fantastic answer. It's something that I think people who are maybe coming to this live stream later after they've watched the film can really think about and process that. Along those lines, how much of the experiences that you were able to pack in do you think are made, and this goes, either one of you can answer that, are sort of made possible by Pooja's gender? Like, do you think that you were allowed, in a sense, more possibilities, more topics to address, issues, questions to raise, by channeling this through a central female character?
I mean, for sure, yeah. I mean, because obviously I identify as a man, so I mean, I chose to make it a female character because I felt like a lot of the emotions that I was experiencing at the time could be expressed a lot more effectively through a female character. That was my main reasoning behind it. I just felt like if I had a male character and tried to express it through a male character, that a lot of different themes would come up that I didn't intend. In terms of like toxic masculinity, that wasn't something I wanted to really explore in this film, right? I wanted to explore more the identity issues of growing up as a person of color in the neighborhood without, tackling those gender issues. So I was just trying to streamline it. So I chose to use a female character because of that. Yeah.
And Zareen, on the flip side, I mean, it starts out, as Andrew said, it sort of takes a different turn halfway or so into the film. Is this something that, again, that you feel as a female performer, this particular narrative offered you opportunities that are, pretty rare, pretty unexpected?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it does help for sure, because a huge aspect of Pooja's arc is the desirability factor. Like, she just doesn't feel desirable. And the fact with a lot of women of color is you're not only undesired when you're growing up in white communities, but in your own communities. And I think that's something that Pooja's grappling with a lot as well, because the woman that's sort of upheld as the most desirable version of what anybody would ever want is a white woman, and that's a very specific thing to women of color, because it's not just, you're not just grappling with that as like a of color versus white thing, you're also grappling with that in your own communities as like your own community thinks you're not good enough. And I think Pooja being a young girl sort of allowed that to be fleshed out a bit more than if it was an opposite gender, because I don't think men of color really go through that in the same exact way, because they sort of don't have to grapple with the idea of women of color not thinking they're enough either, whereas women of color are constantly having to fight that fight in every aspect of their lives, with their own community, with the men in their own lives, with the boys that they deal with in their own communities. Like, they're hyper masculinized, they're seen as, what you settle for, not really what you aspire to. And especially with South Asian communities, that's something that you're still fighting right now. In our communities, you see a lot of jokes being made, even constantly, to that regard, where it's you're either sort of fetishized by white men, or you're masculinized by people in your own community. And I think that also sort of adds to the fact why Pooja wants to not be who she is so badly, because she's fighting that sort of conflict in every aspect of her life.
Along those lines, there's a really interesting character who's also of Indian heritage, but she's from Trinidad. And there's a lot of friction between her and Pooja. In fact, she really picks on, she bullies Pooja. I wonder if, Andrew, you want to speak a little bit about your decision to include her, what her character represents, and then Zareen, if you want to give us any kind of like behind the scenes insight into working those the conflicts.
I mean, that character was important for me to have in the story. It was based on real life, like my experiences in high school. Like, I remember witnessing these conversations happen between Indian students and a Trinidadian student, where there even within that community, it's like, West Indians are not necessarily, they don't want to be packaged in that same group as Indians from India. So I saw that firsthand, and so I experienced that firsthand, and I just I just thought there was just the complexity of culture growing up. It is something that I don't see often in TV and movies. So I just felt like it was something that I wanted to bring up in the background to some extent, where and I wasn't necessarily making any conclusions about it, right? It was just more just like authentically trying to show like what it's actually like growing up as a person of color in a very diverse neighborhood where people come from so many different backgrounds, so many different cultures, and what happens when you put like it's kind of the the North American experiment. You just put a lot of people together and just see how will they interact and get along. And I felt like that's what growing up in high school was like for me. It was just so many different cultures, and like you see all these strange clashes where people are trying to hold on to their identities or try to gain some sort of sense of self, because you're already dealing with being a teenager on top of all of that, right? So so I just wanted to include that in some respect.
It's definitely something that is missing, right, from films about people of color, the internal friction and controversy. Zareen, I mean, filming those scenes sort of goes exactly, it reflects what you were talking about being judged by women in your own community, but it also fundamentally goes against, I'm sure, what's all of our mission here, which is, representation and unity. Is there any behind the scenes stories you want to share with us about prepping for that?
Honestly, like behind the scenes in terms of those scenes were kind of funny because we had a lot of fun as a cast together. So having to sort of switch into that sheer animosity was quite interesting to do every time. I think the only funny thing about those scenes was I had to be hit with that dodgeball in the head about 18 times before we stopped shooting that. So I think that's the funniest thing that I can say about those scenes. I mean, like, I think in terms of the conflict itself, though, I think it's just like the overarching issue of white supremacy, right? It's just being us fighting amongst each other so that we never got to tackle what the actual problem was. Growing up as a teenager, you just sort of want to be as distanced from other people of color as much as you can until you sort of realize that that's not where you want to be. But I think that's what the conflict is between the two of them, because in this film, obviously, the West Indian character is bullying the Indian character, but I've also seen the reverse where it's just like people from South Asia will be like, well, you're not real Indians. Like you're, like you don't get to participate in South Asian culture because you're not real Indians. So it's always just about that constant, like, how do I get a leg up? I want to be not like I'm not that kind of person of color sort of situation, which sort of benefits nobody but white supremacy, and just sort of having the opportunity eventually to go get past that.
There is at I think it's the final line of the film, Ropit says, Amit, I promise, it's always a race thing. So Andrew, I wonder if you want to unpack that a little, and both of you, this is set in the 1990s. Is it still always a race thing? Have we moved forward at all? I know this is a huge question, but kind of drop that line like a bomb.
Yeah. I mean, that was probably like the first line I wrote before I even started the script, right? And it's just because it was a lot of things that I was like thinking about, right? Like that on every level, especially in the Western world, that everything comes down to race. In my opinion, was my personal point of view. That when it comes to economics, politics, personal relationships, dating, it kind of like permeates every single part of our lives. And it has become a conversation, and we can see that in real time now on the internet, that everybody's having a conversation about race in every aspect of our lives, personal, politics, social, everything, right? So I just thought that for us to really get past it, I think like we have to really have those conversations. So I think that's happening, right? And I don't think to say that it's not a race thing doesn't really solve anything, right? Like when people say that's not racist or that's not a race thing, or you're just thinking too much about it, that then we just stay in the status quo. So I think it's just something that we should never shy away from and think as talking about it is an offensive thing. It's not offensive. It's just something that's a reality that we should talk about in order to get past. But that was my view when I kind of wrote that. But I mean, at the same time, it was just something for the viewers to think about. I mean, I didn't necessarily want them to make their own mind, like make the conclusions that I made. Right? That Rohit's character specifically views things that way, right? Because of the hardships that he's experiencing in his life, right? And Pooja's reaction is kind of the opposite, right? Where it's like, no, I just want to get along with everybody kind of attitude, right? So I was just showing those two sides of that coin, where Rohit felt very aggressive and confrontational about it, while Pooja did not.
Yeah, it's a fantastic moment, and it's definitely one that lingers. Serene, how do you feel about that as a sort of parting shot? And also, do you feel that we progressed much?
I think my answer is going to be very similar to Andrew's in that I think it's very accurate. I think race is very ingrained in every aspect of society, but I think all those systems are very intertwined, and that's why it's always a race thing, because you can't really talk about capitalism without understanding race. You can't talk about gender without understanding race as well. It's not that race is the overarching thing that like rules over everything. It's just that every single one of the systems of oppression work with each other to continue said oppression, whichever specific system it might be. And yeah, I think it was a really important thing to add to the end of the movie, because again, Pooja is just so in denial that it's ever anything to do with race, that she can just sort of circumvent everything that she's ever experienced, never have to deal with any of it if she just closes her eyes and just tries hard enough. And I think the fact that she herself finally just accepts that this is who she is, and this is the life that she might have, issues in her life that she's going to have to deal with moving forward, that's how she actually finds peace. It's not ignoring the problems. It's recognizing that there are problems and she's going to have to deal with them as they come. And I think that's an important message to sort of go forward with, is that it's not enough to sort of just blindly throw stuff out there and hope that it's going to fix itself. Even when we talk about representation, it's not enough to just sort of put faces to the camera. It's about everything behind the scenes that has contributed to a lack of actors of color on screen. So what's going on behind the scenes that we have to dismantle, what's going on even outside of film that's contributing to the problems in film. So everything is just so interconnected. You can't really attack one thing without talking about the other. And I think that's what that line really encapsulates.
Well, we're almost out of time, but Andrew, there's a Hollywood Reporter piece about White Elephant, about the two of you, really glowing piece. It mentions that Andrew is a co-founder of the Asian-Canadian Film Alliance, which is an advocacy group which is involved in domestic film and TV industry. So before we let you go, could you share with the viewing audience anything you've got coming down the pipeline, things to look out for, where they can follow you, look for your other work, all that good stuff? Both of you.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you can follow me at This Is Andrew C. That's my handle for all my social media. Yeah, and yes, I am the co-founder of the Asian-Canadian Film Alliance in Canada, which we just started recently, just in May. So we're just starting to really get out there. But we had a panel recently, a few months ago, just discussing the racial barriers happening within our community, and in the larger Canadian industry specifically. And I was inspired by a lot of the Asian American groups and organizations that are doing the good work in the Asian American community. So I felt like we needed something here in Canada. So I owe a lot to a lot of the work that's being done by Asian Americans. Yeah, so we're just working on mentorship programs right now because that's a large issue, right? Because Kim's Convenience here, a Canadian show had a lot of problems behind the scenes in terms of representation. So that's kind of like what kind of really pushed us to start the organization and feel like we really need this. But yeah, you can find us on Facebook at Asian Canadian Film, on Instagram, Asian Canadian Film, and look out for the programs and things that we have probably coming next year.
Great. So you heard it, audiences. So Zareen, where can we see you next?
So you can also follow me at Zareen B across social platforms. It's Zareen B on TikTok. I've been working pretty behind the scenes for a little bit for with again Real World Film Festival and Fate Pictures, so you can sort of tune in with Real World. We have a lot of really cool programs upcoming that are aimed at helping BIPOC communities sort of connect with mentors, workshops, things like that. In terms of my own personal life, I'm working on some concepts for shorts of my own and just steadily auditioning, and hopefully something will happen in the future. Other than that, I have some small roles on Clarice and Handmaid's Tale that you can sort of see some cameos on if you'd like.
Thanks so much, both of you. It's been an absolute pleasure. I feel that you have enlightened us on the complexities of White Elephant, and viewing audiences, there's still a little bit of time to rent that film. And the film is making the festival circuit, so even if you miss it with Path, you may be able to catch it elsewhere. And keep an eye out for both Zareen and Andrew. Thank you so much, and good evening, everybody.
I'm getting lit off the process. Anything you say